Hey, everybody, welcome to another edition of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, where we simplify the complexities of your leadership journey. My name is Mo, and I'll be sitting in the host chair today. I have a very special guest, Nader Safinya. He is the founder and principal of Black Ribbit, the culture branding company, who brings more than 20 years of experience building organizations through transformation and building culture brands that align with companies and help them to say what they actually do. His work has been featured on multiple podcasts, including The Hidden Disconnect and Culture Branding, How to Build a Company That Moves 56 Times Faster. Today, we're going to dig into leadership, culture, brand alignment, and how emerging leaders can apply these insights to lead smartly and authentically. Nader, welcome.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you so much for having me. That was a great intro. Appreciate it.
Great. I try to do my best on these. So great to have you here. Before I get to my questions, why don't you tell my audience a little bit about you, where you come from, your journey to where you are today?
Sure. So I was born to an Iranian family. My family's Iranian. I was born in the US. And before the age of 18, I'd lived in Indonesia, the UAE, and France. I completed a degree in graphic design with, interestingly enough, an emphasis in sculpture as a bachelor in California. And then I got a master's in Munich in design management when I was 32, 2018. Lived in New York for a stint right during COVID. Started the business there, excuse me, and then had to come down to Houston out of necessity, and that's how I landed here. What I'm doing today, the culture branding program and the culture branding company, was conceived a few years ago after I applied to 460 jobs in 6 months in 2021. And I got one interview. So
Wow.
with the absolutely no feedback, I felt like I was in a black hole with no mirrors, and it felt like I couldn't breathe, and I felt completely invisible and dehumanized and kind of like a failure after about 15 years of everything I just described. You know, a linear path in design and years in the field, 2 degrees and all this stuff, and one interview was just crazy. And I figured I couldn't be the only one going through this. I also landed on the fact that if brand is defined as a gut feeling about a person, place, or thing, and those feelings are influenced by behavior, the experience that I was having couldn't have been a brand problem. It had to have been a behavior problem. And that led me down a path to discover that companies are also designing for 2 different experiences. You have leadership inside and outside. So you have like leadership, branding, marketing, sales focused exclusively on the customer experience, while you have change management, HR, and recruiting focused on the employee experience. And these 2 sides never talk. So you have this disconnect between the employer, employee, customer relationships, and companies saying one thing and doing something else. And ultimately, customers are being treated like dollar signs, and employees are being treated like dollars spent. And ironically, no one is being treated like a human. So you basically have a market that is not getting what the market sees, and expectations are broken. And the first place you notice this disconnect, just like I did, is in the job application process. And ultimately, like, jobs are written as project briefs. Like, they're filled with pumped up language, like, you'll get to do this, you'll get to do that. And it's like, great, that all sounds good, but what are you going to do for me? And so, like, when's the last time you read a job description that actually describes how that job will impact your quality of life? So that's
Right.
where all of this sort of came from. This notion that, why is it that there is this disconnect, this break? And it's really because the 2 experiences are being designed separately. And the culture brand program that I've created designs them simultaneously. So that's how I got here.
Nader, how do you define culture branding? What distinguishes it from traditional branding or employer branding?
Sure, that's a great question. Traditional branding is typically focused on the customer experience, defining the customer value proposition. Why would somebody want to buy from you? Right. And then employer branding is about the opposite. It's about the employee buy-in. Like, why would somebody want to work for you? The irony in the phrase employer branding is that, typically speaking, going back to me talking about the siloed experiences, when you design for a customer experience, in traditional branding, you define the value proposition, the unique selling point for customers. And then you're basically creating a reason to get their buy-in to why this company exists, like to buy into the values of this organization, right? We agree with what this organization stands for. I feel like they see me, therefore I will pay them to buy something from them for their services or otherwise. As an employee, you want employee buy-in to also the organization's values and what it stands for. However, the miss in standard employer branding is also in the name. It's you're getting employee buy-in, but what are you getting them bought into? And it's typically the customer experience. So you're getting employee buy-in to the customer experience, not their own experience, right? So that's where the miss typically happens. And again, it's in the name. Why is it that it's customer branding and employer branding, not employee branding? You're trying to create an experience for the employees. As an organization, you're serving your customers and your employees. This is something that's also often missed. We're serving the people who work for us. Just because we're paying them doesn't mean we're not serving them as well. So culture branding in my program is simply defined as merging your communications with your operations and connecting your fundamental values to every experience and behavior across an entire ecosystem. So that when an employee and a customer actually meet for the first time, they tell the exact same story because they had the same experience.
For emerging leaders, why should they care about culture branding? How does it impact them personally? How does it impact them professionally?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, culture branding is not really a nice to have. It's not something that, you should even be thinking about employing or applying or building, because it's a culmination of two things that exist regardless of whether you want them to or not. Your culture exists whether you want it to or not. Your brand exists whether you want it to or not, right? Your brand is how people feel about you, and your culture is your lived belief system. And whether you want to them or not, they exist because both are a consequence of behavior. So the question becomes, is your culture designed? Is your brand designed? Is it deliberate? And when we act a certain way, people behave a certain way. When we act a certain way, people react a certain way. Their feelings are a consequence of our behavior, and other people's behavior is a consequence of our behavior. If you're a leader in your organization and, you're, let's say, like you walk around and you're constantly yelling, so other people are going to follow suit because that's what you do here. The boss is yelling. I guess yelling is okay. We're all going to yell. And it starts creating whatever environment that is. And that becomes part of your culture. So culture branding ensures that every experience that everybody has, when I say everybody, I mean everybody. I'm talking about your target audience, your customer demographic. I'm talking about your target employee demographic, your prospective employees at every level, different departments, different ages, different demographics, the passersby, strangers seeing your ads on the street, seeing your building, walking into your lobby, all these things. Traditionally speaking, branding by definition is actually an emotional contract at every single touch point, right? Like across the board. And culture branding specifically ensures that your fundamental values, your non-negotiables are injected into every interaction, whether that's like from something as measly as the office pens you choose for your office to something as complex as your hiring and firing policies. And so the reason that everyone should be employing culture branding, and it's an absolute must, is because it results in a few things. One is inherent trust is built because people are acting truthfully and honestly at every interaction. Two people are not being treated differently. They're being treated the same way. And when there's consistency, that breeds trust. Additionally, this is where it gets people ooh and ah at this one, depending on who you are. It starts to remove hierarchy because decision making becomes democratized. Get ready for the oohs and ahs, because now you have an objective model through which you make your decisions. Does this decision honor these values, and does it elicit this response we want, which is your brand? Values is culture, response is brand. The more you can work through that lens, the faster you make decisions, because now it's objective, ego is out the window, it's less emotional. Does it honor our values, and does it elicit the response? Yes or no? If the answer is no, adjust it till it does. If the answer is yes, go for it. That's why everyone should apply it and employ it, because it helps you make decisions faster, it democratizes decision making, and it increases loyalty out the door.
Nadir, what role do emerging leaders play in shaping that inside outside brand alignment? They may not be the CEO, but what kind of influence do they have?
Leaders, well, I mean, culture change, any sort of change is a top down model, right? So, you need to have the influence of the leadership of any organization in order to actually instill those changes. So they have all the influence. If leadership isn't bought into the changes, then the changes won't take place and there will be consistent resistance. The resistance, let me rephrase that. The catalyst for change, however, starts, let's call it, at the bottom of the ladder. It starts where the tension rises, where people are unsatisfied with what's going on with leadership. That's actually why I always say, like, Gen Z, God bless them, because they're the ones ruffling all these feathers. Like, they're just not taking any crap from anybody. And it's come to a point now where, they're in their mid-20s. They're going to be there, if they're not already in leadership roles, they're going to be across the board in leadership roles in the next 5 to 8 years. And it's one of those, like, you better get with the program or get out of the way moments, because they're coming, they're growing, they're taking over. And current leadership, we're in an interesting position right now, right? You have, you yourself said your own audience has a discrepancy of roughly 60 some odd years. And
It does.
so that right there demonstrates the age gap, the generational gap within the workplace. And you have boomers who are still working, who are still owning businesses, who are trying to exit or want to exit, and are either trying to leave some sort of legacy or trying to exit clean or whatever. And the people who are coming in need to have some sort of influence over changes that need to take place. Leadership has all the influence.
Nadir, given the shifts in post-COVID and the rise of hybrid work, what leadership behaviors are now non-negotiable for maintaining culture and brand coherence?
Yeah, that's the big question. I guess if you're going to say across the board, emotional intelligence is becoming a non-negotiable. I mean, EQ is sort of the gold standard. That's the currency that everyone needs to be living by. And that's rooted in compassion, understanding, empathy, having the ability to listen, actually pay attention and hear what other people have to say, be open to discourse, and at the same time, be deliberate in your own decision making. Like, there's a sequence of behaviors that I myself employ in my own model at my own company, which is our 3 pillars, our non-negotiables are reliability, compassion, and deliberate action. So, and they have to exist in that order. We show up first, then we listen, then we act. And ironically, if you flip those around, they don't quite work. If you if you're just compassionate and deliberate and then reliable, well, you didn't show up in the first place. So how do you know what's going on? If you're deliberate and reliable, but you lack compassion, then you might do the wrong thing because you didn't actually pay attention. So a non-negotiable in today's and future workspace, in a word, is empathy, Mo. It's basically empathy. And I think you can apply that across the board. It doesn't matter if you're in the trade space, in, some manufacturing company, in fintech, in pharma, in hospitality. It doesn't matter. I think empathy always has a place, and it doesn't mean you're, especially old school, like older school leaders, many who are still in sort of archaic mindsets will talk about empathy as like a sort of soft, like weakness. It's like a soft skill that's unnecessary and it's kind of weak, when in fact it's completely the opposite. Empathy allows you to save time just by paying attention on the front end, and listening and making helping people understand that you understand. It's amazing the kind of loyalty you can instill just by giving someone an ear and actually acting on what you heard.
Nadir, how can a leader in a smaller organization or a nonprofit, unit leader at a smaller level apply culture branding principles without having huge resources?
Yeah, it's sort of the same thing without, again, Mo, at its core, culture branding is applying specifically 3. This is how simple we've made it. 3 non-negotiable values that need to exist always. That's your inner core. That's your truth. That's your instinct. Some people call it God's will. So it's the thing that will always be with you no matter where you go, how you age, what new jobs you take or otherwise as an individual. It's the same thing with an organization. What always has to exist? What values always have to exist? Are you tenacious? Are you compassionate? Are you intentional? Are you authentic? Are you integrous? Are you collaborative? And boil it down to 3 that are very intentionally put together and distilled so that one can't exist without the others. If one doesn't exist, then the other 2 can't exist without it. Think of it like a 3-legged stool. And the point is, if you can always at every interaction, whether it's with customers, whether it's with partners, with donors, with employees, with volunteers or otherwise, if those 3 values exist at every interaction, in an email, in a sales document, in an advertisement, in a hiring process, when you fire somebody, and so on, then you will always elicit a very specific response. And that response is a feeling, and that feeling is your brand. So you can do some minor exercises to kind of figure out what those 3 points are, and then understand, really formalize what the intended desired outcome is, and then just continuously do that in everything that you do. But at the same time, distilling it down to those 3 values has an efficient way there's an efficient way to do that, and then there's a longer way to do that. And even with minimal resources, you can still employ certain exercises by interviewing people, talking to people, really understanding how your organization is perceived by everybody involved in it.
So if a leader wanted to start aligning culture and brand this week, what are a couple actions that you would recommend?
The first thing I recommend is looking at yourself dead in the eyes and asking, would you work for you? And then see
Great
what
question.
answer comes out. That's the first thing I would ask. And then
For sure.
whatever response comes out of that question will set you on the right path.
Man, I'm looking at myself dead in the eyes right now as we're doing this. I'm thinking, gosh, would I work for myself?
But here, Mo, you know what? I'll tell you something. If you do that exercise, and this is for anyone listening, don't say, would I work for me? You have to say, would you work for you? As if you're talking to a third party. That's when it gets awkward. Like, look at yourself in the eyes and say, would you work for you? And that's when it gets weird. And any response is interesting.
That's great. Let me ask you this. How do you measure success in culture branding? So what are the metrics beyond profits? And how do you capture qualitative outcomes like engagement?
Great question. So as we've been talking about, there's 2 sides. There's the customer side and the employee side. So, and for the sake of this argument, we'll just use customer metrics for now, because it's literally the same. It's basically the same metrics. So the top ones are fairly standard. It's loyalty, it's engagement, it's churn or turnover, it's retention, and then ultimately understanding, meaning, does this person understand what we stand for? So the way that we capture it is very much qualitative. We will do surveys to measure. This part is, to those who like analytics, it's always fun, but otherwise it feels boring because it's standard stuff. We're doing a lot of benchmarking. So when we come in and we launch a program, hard data isn't really accumulated until about, I want to say, 12 months in. But soft data, like employee buy-in, for example, is accumulated from day 1. You start getting optimism and hopefulness and buy-in from employees the day we enter the building, because they're involved in this process. They're involved in the interviews. They're involved in our surveys, from the leadership all the way to the door guy, like receptionists and custodians and so on. We speak to everyone. So the way we measure success is after the fact, after we actually implement the culture brand program, is, can employees recite, not just recite, but recite and understand and actually live through the culture brand lens. And we've created a model that doubles as an unconscious adoption technique called the culture brand statement, that doubles as a culture brand filter. that becomes a litmus test. And what we've already talked about, where I say, does my actions honor these three pillars, and does it elicit this response? And so the more and we've created an app around that, an AI app. So the more you use that, the more ingrained the culture brand narrative becomes in your own behaviors. So we're measuring alignment with that statement, understanding of that statement, and then actually quizzing people and running quizzes every 3 months with employees. We're doing customer and employee satisfaction surveys. We're doing customer and employee re-engagement surveys. So with customers, do we have return customers? How often are they returning? We're benchmarking that with previous years from that organization. Sometimes, as you probably know, they don't have that data. So they haven't been doing like really
Hmm.
measuring KPIs or anything.
Right.
And if they do have the data, it's kind of messy or fragmented. So sometimes we have to start from scratch, which is not ideal, but it is what it is. And we have to build a benchmark from where we're beginning. So if you know anything about qualitative measuring and quantitative measuring, you can't start with a benchmark. There's no benchmark. So you have to start with zero. You just go to zero, and then there's no scale of improvement. You start at zero, and then you go, okay, at the 3 month mark, we have this many customers. This many customers have bought this many items. They have bought this many times because we started recording at the zero mark. And now we have a benchmark. Then we can start measuring improvements or decreases or otherwise from there. So we're also measuring decision-making speed, which is a weird thing to say because it's like, how do you measure decision-making speed? We're doing it in hindsight. So we're talking about solving problems that have been deliberated over time that are now being solved 56 times faster on average, which is crazy, through this litmus test, the filter that I just described. And so you have clients who are saying, man, we wish we found you a year ago. We just deliberated on this problem for 12 months and we just solved it in 12 minutes. Another one of my clients was like, we've been talking about this thing for 3 months. We just solved it in 5 minutes. And that's a game changer. So the point is, looking forward, you go, okay, so from here on out, you can use this filter to just start making decisions so much faster because you're not going to be deliberating on anything for more than a few minutes, maybe an hour tops, literally. And then it becomes a operations problem. When, how much, and
Nadir, for upcoming leaders today, what mindset shifts or permissions do you think that they need to internalize to be effective in this culture brand aware era?
So it sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The mindset is, again, if we want to simplify it, we can say they need to be empathetic. They need to be very self-aware, extremely self-aware. That part, I think, is the most important because change is a top-down motion. The leadership has to be very self-aware and open to change themselves. If they hire somebody, why do we hire anybody? It's because we're either not good at something, or we want to, make our lives easier, and we want to, create more productivity, create more output. But at the same time, hopefully we're hiring people because we want to improve their lives as well. Like at the end of the day, the response to the question, why would I want to work at this place, should be rooted in some form of, because it makes my life better, whatever that is. And that could be a number of things. It could be, this place gives me freedom to spend time with my family. It allows me more time to spend with myself. It offers me opportunities to learn. It pays for school, like things like that. Not just benefits and raises every 6 months or whatever. Actual fundamental, circumstances that will inherently improve my life, my quality of life. And that realization is the mindset. That's the mindset that needs to take place. That's what, at the same time, there needs to be some structure as well. Like what I've learned is there's this sort of farce that Gen Z, for example, is not in, like, they don't like structure. That's not true. It's not that they don't like structure or don't like authority. It's that they're not looking for the same things that, older generations were looking for. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for quality of life. They're looking for alignment in themselves with what they do. It's not just about a paycheck for them. In fact, studies show that they would rather a lower paying job that offers them a higher quality of life than a higher paying job that robs them of their own time. It's like at least, what my grandmother used to always say, like, what's the point of making money if you can't spend it?
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
like that's always been the big irony with getting raises and promotions, right? You're like, ooh, I got this promotion, it's awesome. And how long does that high last, man? Like 3 months? You're like, look at all this money I have now. And then 3 months in, you're like, crap, I'm still working in the same place with the same people, and I have more work to do and less time to spend with myself or my family because I have more responsibilities. How is this better? So that's what it is. It's really like understanding that it's really about quality of life.
Yeah. What a great encouragement, Nader. If you could give one challenge for the leaders that are watching or listening to this podcast today, especially the emerging ones, what would that challenge be?
Again, I lean back into it. Ask yourself, would you work for you? Ask yourself, would you buy from you? And whatever answer comes up is interesting. Even if you're in a room by yourself, because you can really be honest with yourself. If the answer is no, well, why not? If the answer is yes, that's really interesting. If you say, I don't know, that's even more interesting. And, the challenge there is to dig into whatever your response is, because it's not a question of if you would work for you, then everybody would. That's not the point. The point is you need to be able to create an environment in which you are comfortable working yourself before you start asking other people to work there. That's the point.
Gosh, I love it. Nader, where can my audience connect with you?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. Very easy to find there, Nader Safinya. And you can find me. Also, you can just Google me or find me on my website, blackribbit.com.
Thanks so much for sharing your insights and frameworks. I love your work on culture, and I hope that the audience is asking themselves, would you work for you? So that's the question today for my audience. Go right now to the mirror and ask yourself that question. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody, like and subscribe to the podcast. Don't forget to sign up for the Rising Tide newsletter. It comes out every month. We give you all the good stuff. Nader, thanks so much for coming on. I hope to have you on again.
Thanks, Mo. It was a pleasure, brother.
Yes, sir. Bye now.